let's do a quick sketch of the skull. And sketching the skull is really useful just because it's a beautiful object, but it's also really essential in understanding portraiture. And the core of the skull is the brain case, which is the brain case is that core central part. Then from the front, the essence of it is essentially a sphere. And that's how I'd like to start if I'm sketching in the skull from the front is basic, a kind of simple sphere. And from there, since we're viewing it from the front, what I'll do is I'll drop a little plumb line down the front and a line blocking down the center. And what this is basically dividing the space into thirds. We have three more or less even spaces. And I can see that, we have, and I'll even drop down a little line on the sides to show the space that this is going to fit in. And you kind of have the overall proportions blocked in. Now, the first thing I'll do is I'll go and look at this area here, which is the brow ridge. Now, the brow ridge starts off right around this area, and you can see it's almost like wings. I will kind of feel around that shape, but this is a really core skeletal element of the skull. And kind of you want to get kind of muscle memory because this feature comes in portraiture constantly. But that's what this is. You can see that sort of raised area, and you can feel that on your own face. So that right below there, somewhere around here, is going to be the eye cavity. The start of the eye cavity is going to be below that halfway point, somewhere around there. And we kind of, we want to allow a little space for that. And without getting too dark, we can get into more detail in a bit, but we just want to lay out essentially the landmarks of the face. And also, I'll note, just down the brow ridge, why the brow ridge is so important is because right where it connects with the bridge of the nose, which is the skeletal part, as opposed to the end of the nose, which is more cartilaginous. But, that's where that big, prominent shape of the nose starts off, right below the brow ridge. And then you can kind of start to see on either sides of there roughly that shape for the eye cavity, which is filled, of course, with the eyeball. Now that we've got that started, kind of somewhere right above the bottom area, you can kind of see, and this is going to vary a little bit from person to person, but the nasal cavity is going to start somewhere in there, and that juts down roughly about that, a nice big round shape for that. And it even has something of a thickness to it. And then below the eye ridge, the orbital cavity, you can see there's a very strong thickness that then curls around. So you can kind of see the actual thickness of the skull in there. Now, let's take a look back at the brow ridge where that kind of curls over, and then on this side of the eye, you have this thickness, this part of the temple, and then that comes up and pulls up into the top of the skull. And you could see, you know, now that we're starting to get into detail, the top of the skull kind of comes to almost a little crown, a point there, and then comes down. Let's see. And what I'm going to do is the side of the skull at the temple kind of flattens out a little bit. So I'll draw actually kind of a straight line, and then I'll pull that up into the top part of the skull. Now, the side of what we have, the zygomatic arch is what this is called, the cheekbone, which is what gives our the sides of our face a nice volume. That sweeps down, and you can see how it relates to the thickness of the eye cavity. Come around here, and then let's quickly look at the other side and flesh that out with a little more information. You can see there's the brow ridge, and then we're coming down to get the other edge of the eye cavity, the orbital cavity here. And then there's the nice thing about these photos is they're actually lit quite nicely so that you see all of these edges and details. Now there's that side part of the skull where it juts forward, and then we're pulling back up again like we did on the other side into the top of the cranium there. And black will flatten that out and pull in, and then we're going to flesh out the other side of the cheekbone, the zygomatic arch there, pull that down. So we've got the top going. Now let's take a look at the bottom portion and move our way up. If we look at the bottom of the cheekbone here, the bottom of the jawbone, the maxilla, I believe it's called. It's kind of squares off in this case. And that's going to be the bottom of the jaw, the mandible. And then the sides of the jaw, I notice if I were to draw a straight line, kind of inset somewhere about here. So that juts down and then forms a nice curve. Depending, you know, we all have a slightly different shape of our jaw, but it comes in about like that. Now, somewhere between about the bottom of, let's see, the bottom of the nasal cavity and the bottom of the jaw, you know, let's see about the halfway point, that top ridge of this part of the skull is going to be right before the teeth drop down out of there. And you could see the sides of this, I believe it's called the maxilla, but it comes up and drops down about like here. I'll have to look that up in my anatomy book as soon as I'm done with this sketch. But it's a distinct part of the skull that juts forward and holds the teeth. And you could see like where the bottom edge of the teeth would be somewhere kind of around here. The main thing with teeth is I avoid drawing individual teeth until, if I do it all, I draw them more as sort of individual rows, the bottom row and a top row. And then I'll flesh out the sides of the mandible, the jaw, here. And I probably need to space that out a little bit more. And then this, you could see it has these interesting textures, but this very prominent part of the where the teeth will start from, and this will then kind of spread up about like this. Now notice there's a natural curve in the skull, in this part of the skull. So the teeth, actually, it's not a straight line like that. It has a nice curvature to it, a pretty extreme curvature. So the top row of teeth is going to be, you know, something along the line like that. And I'm more likely to draw the top part of the teeth where they start rather than the bottom. Just that's sort of just something it sort of establishes the teeth without calling too much attention to them. And then the bottom row of teeth is going to be, you know, fit in somewhere in here. You know, and then the bottom of the teeth follow along. So we have, you know, we're starting to get a pretty good indication of the shape of the skull. Now, just quickly, if we were to look at and quickly sketch the side of the skull, why don't we take a look at this here? You can see that basically if we were going to sketch this in, we would start with, now notice how basically it's almost like a bean shape. It's like an oval. From the side, the cranium is oval. From the front, it's pretty round. But what we want to do is sketch in that big oval shape like that. And that represents basically, you know, it kind of mimics, you know, roughly the shape of our brain, being that, you know, the brain case is the vessel that holds and protects our brain. So basically that's a good starting point. And then from there, I'll drop down some plumb lines, some sighting lines, and make a little grid. And if I divide this in half, and I can do a similar thing where we have 3 compartments that will represent the position of the skull. Now we can say, and then I'll just maybe draw a little through the halfway point, a little plumb line to help guide me. So here we have this part of the skull about here. So right about here is this part, this brow ridge, which is one of the things that we were sketching just previously in the front view. So this is where this pulls in, and we could kind of shape it so that it comes up, and we can even just now maybe flesh out this shape a little more, but you can kind of see how it comes up to this apex here and then back down on this side. So this is kind of a good starting point. And a good, more or less at this sort of halfway point here, is the back part of the mandible, the jaw, somewhere around here. And the bottom of the jaw is going to be somewhere around here. So you know it's going to at some point sweep back up about like this. And we know the brow ridge is here, And you could kind of see the eye cavity from the side. It's a little harder to make out, but it's going to be somewhere in this area. Now, the interesting thing is, from at about the, the halfway point of the entire skull, somewhere a little bit above this sort of between the second and the third measure, is kind of about where we can, right above there is about where we can maybe lightly sketch in the side of the zygomatic arch, which is the cheekbone. And this is kind of very roughly in that area. And you can even see, if I noted just in the front drawing, that this area flattens out, right? It's like this part of the skull, you can see flattens, and you can see it from the top looking down. It flattens on the side. So if you follow along where we come down, we've got the brow ridge here. Now we can make out the top of the eye cavity, the orbital cavity here. And it's a little more abstract looking from the side, but somewhere in here is where that nice big eye cavity is. And this side that connects with the top of the cheekbone, the arch, zygomatic arch. But notice this shape. If you were to follow this line up and flesh it out, you will get that side flattened out area. And if you come back on the other way, up from the cheekbone, you can feel your way up from the side this way. So this is that flat part of the brain case. We call it, I think, this part, the temple, basically, right to the side of our eye. Now and then also quickly, while we're here, below here, what this is, this odd little protuberance here, is an attachment point for our ear. So that actually is, there for a very specific reason. And we can feel our way back and round this out a little bit more. So we're getting there closer. Now we can see also that if we have the nasal cavity, and I notice something quickly, if I set this pencil on top from the edge of the brow ridge, you'll notice that the nose and the mouth actually bulge out slightly further than the brow ridge. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but the bridge of the nose juts out pretty severely, and a little bit beyond that first line where we had the brow ridge. So it sticks out a little bit further, and then very dramatically jagged kind of pulls back in and then out again to line up with that part of the skull for the mouth. So this area is the nasal cavity from the side, which gives it that kind of dramatic profile. Eye is here. There's that side of the brow ridge. Now, let's take a look. There's, again, this part. We'll finish up the cheekbone. Pull that over, and let's find the teeth and the mouth. Now, look how far that juts out, as far as the nose cavity. And it doesn't feel that way, but it actually, that's how much farther it really sticks out in space. So somewhere in here, basically, it's this shape, this part of the skull, it's almost like a ball. It's like a tennis ball that juts out like that. It's a good way to think of it. It helps you to kind of notice, because it doesn't feel like it is, but it really juts out quite a bit. So if I were to then kind of trace this over, it's surprisingly really, the teeth jut out quite a bit and then recede back down, and then we're connecting back with our jawbone, a little more maxilla, I believe. And we can kind of come back here and see we've got the top of the jawbone, and we'll kind of flesh that out a little bit more. And comes down this area here. I want to say it's the maxilla. It's driving me crazy. I can't remember if that's the name, but I'll look it up later. But this is that sweeping round curve here. And then the top row of teeth also, it almost gives it that kind of jack-o'-lantern-like smile on the skull. And then the back of the teeth are going to be somewhere in here. Now we're getting there. We've got the bottom row of teeth then, unless we have an underbite. This one is a more typical with a position where the upper row of teeth sit on sit out on the outside, and then the lower part of the teeth, the lower row of teeth, sit underneath. So that is, basically a very simplified version of that part of the skull. And then you can also see, if we wanted to look at, let's see, if we wanted to look at the skull and sketch it quickly, in profile, like in a 3/4 view, what I would suggest is if we start sketching it in somewhere in between a circle, since we're in a 3/4 view, I'm going to sketch in somewhere in between a sphere and an oval, but maybe more on the sphere side to start with. Then we can flesh it out later. And I'm going to do the same thing where I'll draw a light dividing point halfway, and then I'll see we have 1, 2, 3, and this will give me some enough room to tack on the jaw to it. Now here's the different thing. So we know the brow line is going to be here, but I want you to notice that if we were to draw a plumb line down the center from, say, there's a little cleft in this skull's chin, if we drew a line straight up to here, to the base of the nose, it would be somewhere in here. So I'm going to draw a little axis line, and then if we kept going, it would follow along the curvature of the skull. So we're going to come up, it would go past the brow ridge, and then it would start pulling back to follow the volume of the skull. So we know that this is going to be basically the center line, where that center part of the jaw is going to end up somewhere down here. And here we have, let's quickly start by sketching in that brow ridge, which is this part here. That interesting, almost like spread eagle wing kind of shape of the brow. Depending on the person, it'll be more or less pronounced, but it's always going to be there to some degree. And then, you have the the base bridge of the nose flaring out from there. There's where that little bulge is. Then it kind of comes up, then starts to curve back up to the apex of the skull, and then comes back, maybe comes out a little longer than we have it. So now we could come down and sketch in on this side. If we've got the bridge of the nose coming out here, the brow is here, we want to get somewhere down here that edge of the orbital cavity, the eye cavity. And the eye cavity comes probably, sometimes you gotta kind of play it, eyeball it and see what feels right. So I'll do that lightly at first, and then I can adjust it later. But so there, and there's the thickness sort of that eye cavity, and then there's the cheekbone, which squares off, interestingly, kind of here. And then at the nasal cavity, comes in and is at a surprising angle. It's not flat. You can see how much of an angle that is. So this is one of the reasons why it's really useful to do a lot of sketching of skulls if you're going to be doing a lot of portraits, because it does help you to kind of internalize some of these structures going on that are not, we think we know what they're like, but when you start to draw them, you start to realize, oh, that's not quite how I visualized it. Like, for example, like that flatness of the cheek there. Now, on and then here we have, so if the top of the eye cavity is here, top of this eye cavity is here, and then kind of disappears behind there. Now, here we have, again, like I was saying, the bottom of the jawbone, and here you have this part of the skull, and this part that we mentioned where that temple, the side of the brain case, flattens out a little bit. And then there's that little protuberance for the ear. And given that this is in 3/4 view, this back of the skull is gonna stick out a little bit beyond my initial line. And that puts the back of the jaw somewhere around here. And then it juts, dramatically forward like this. And we're starting to get somewhere with this. And we could see then there's that nice sweeping angle of the zygomatic arch, the cheekbone, and kind of sweeps in. The side of the jaw coming out here. Now, if we go and look for, let's see, that jaw is going to notice that big curve, and notice how much that juts out. Like if I were to draw like a tennis ball size kind of circle as a guide, I mean, that seems crazy, but that is actually surprisingly pretty close to what it is, kind of shockingly. But notice if I follow along with this, how this juts out, and then there's that ridge to which our upper row of teeth will connect. And notice how it's a nice curve. It doesn't come straight across. It curves up all the way back here. Gives it that kind of smiley face. And I know the back edge of this part kind of comes down and gives it that that nice kind of smile. Now look at how from that point, that front row of teeth then come down a little bit, kind of, and even those don't come straight down. They're kind of a little bit rounded, and then come back about like this. And that is, and then the lower jaw, the row of teeth for there will sit nicely, you know, underneath that top row. Somewhere like this. And then we'll jut down. So it is a, and then we have again this sort of flattened area of the skull here. And you could see even sort of, you know, then you got to start to look for some of the individual, more specific parts and shapes, the little facets, especially, you know, things like the thickness of the eye cavity. And then you can, you know, get more specific and, like, you know, get the actual shape and size of some of these shapes.